So in this video, we're going to get the basic environment ready for web development in terms of the tools you need, the setup you need to get going with developing a web application. So in the last video, I showed you DnaWeb. Since then, I've made quite a few improvements to DnaWeb. So there's been 5 more releases with lots of features added. So you can either watch the previous video or you can simply watch this one for the setup. It doesn't really matter, but the simple thing is you go to DnaWeb.io, download the installer. So 64-bit, if you've got 64-bit, go for that one. Once you've installed this download, it's just a MSI installer. So just install that on your machine. Then you can now create your project if you haven't already. So in this one, we're going to start doing responsive in the next video, responsive web design. So we'll create a folder called responsive. And in here now is typically where you start setting up your, your web application. You start making your HTML files, your CSS files, your Sass files, everything we did in the last video, kind of getting going. Well, now you don't have to because I've built it into DnaWeb. So instead of doing that, to get started on a fresh project, you simply click in the address bar inside your project folder, which is currently empty. Type DnaWeb and press enter. And that will spin up the DnaWeb. So this is now your system. It should be the only system you now need to work with web development. And to get going straight away, just type in new template blank. So you can see down here, new space template space blank. Press enter. It'll ask you where to extract to, so leave it as the current folder. And you can see then it's created these files. It's created a blank template. So there's one little bug in this that I'll fix today, where it should automatically spin up a live server. So for now, once you've generated your template, simply quit, press Q and enter to quit out of DnaWeb, and just start it back up again. Just type in DnaWeb, and I'll fix this. So by the time you're probably watching this video, it'll get fixed. And what you can see, this is done. When it started up DnaWeb, it spun up what this is called a live server. So we've now got the blank template, and we've effectively got a website ready with header. So I'll show you what's gone into this. It's basically similar to the last video. When we made the new template, it's created a source folder, which has got the DNA config file in, which sets up the output path to all the generated stuff to web root. And then this thing, live servers, is what's then spun up this automatic page here of your website. And that's why it spun up when we started DnaWeb, because of this line. And then as well as your config, we have the HTML, where it's then automatically made as a header, a footer, and an index, like we did in the last video. So you've got the header, header and footer, and then the index with just the header. And what this live server's now done is, first off, if we go to the responsive folder, so go to the actual folder we made, right click and open with the code if you've got Visual Studio Code installed, which is what I'd recommend to do. And when you install Visual Studio Code, make sure you tick all the boxes that say, add open with options to right click menu. And now you'll get this little option here so you can see all your files as you're working in Visual Studio Code. And I'll typically then drag this to one side and then click your website for the other, or you can just have 2 monitors. And you can see it's made the HTML folder for us in source with a basic setup. It's also made a Sass file that will output to the web root assets CSS folder, and just a basic Sass file. So now if we edit a file, you'll see, we edit in here and click save, you see it automatically updates on this side. So you've got live feedback as you're working. So if we go to the Sass file, do background black, color white, and save, it just instantly updates. So you've got your environment set up and ready. And you can also see in the web root folder the generated CSS and the generated HTML. You can also edit these directly. It doesn't really matter. You shouldn't do, but it'll still work the same. So stick with your source folder for editing your DnaWeb files. And then this is basically the setup you'll need now. So I spent a lot of work, a lot of time this week improving this DnaWeb to do all these things. So everything you see here, the way it's just created the template automatically, and the way it's now spinning up a server for us and doing all that, has all been part of what I've added this last week. and there's a lot gone into this. But for now, this is just the showing you how to get ready for an environment for developing the web. This is obviously brand new. I've just made this, so you won't find any info on it other than what I write at the minute. So this kind of setup of one compiling Sass files automatically. You typically need software like I think one's called CodeKit on the Mac maybe, and you've got like Prepros, PREPOS, and they are basically Sass compilers with typically something similar to this built in, like spinning up a website from your HTML files and then automatically refreshing. But I'm pretty sure those are paid applications. So this is all free and open source, so you can now use the DnaWeb. There's a lot more powerful things in the DnaWeb as well. So I've added things where this templates come from is a live data source. So if we went to the GitHub repo and we went to DnaWeb, then go to source, DnaWeb core, live data, and then source. You'll see I've done a whole write-up on the source of how you make your own and how you make use of this. So the template is the only thing you've seen, which simply created this blank template, but it's a lot more powerful than that. You can have it create anything you like. So we're going to get it creating a whole responsive web design template for us in the next few videos. But this shows you all the info you need. Again, I'll do this in a video though, of how we make use of all these extra features. But the point of what I'm trying to do with this DnaWeb, this single tool, is to combine everything that you typically need in a web development environment, which is usually a Sass compiler, a live server, some stuff to handle HTML, which we've now done anyway with this DnaWeb. You end up usually with 3 or 4 different tools or commands you constantly have to run, and it's really annoying. So my plan is whenever you're starting a web design and whenever you're working in the web, all you should have to do is spin up DnaWeb and it'll handle everything for you. So that's the plan going forward. So you can see here as well, there's a list of commands of things we can do. So this is, let's go through the folder structure. So we go to desktop responsive. You'll see the template did it for us, but I'll just explain this as, again, my preference of how we set up a web folder. So web root is what's expected to be the static HTML files, the static output, which is what's then being served here. So excluding ASP.NET because that'll lie somewhere else. So web root's kind of your static website as you're building before you then move into the server side. It's not all auto-generated, so the index is, and the assets, the CSS, the style is, but you can add assets into here, you can add fonts, you can add images, and you typically just place them in here. So it's not necessarily an entirely auto-generated folder, but you will have your HTML and CSS being put in from effectively the DnaWeb config telling it to go there. And inside your source is what you'd expect to edit, so these are your source files. One for HTML, which has got the DNA HTML files in, and another for your Sass. So again, I'd structure your Sass in here, your HTML in here, and that's all you really need so far. We'll have JavaScript coming up shortly, but I'd keep everything in this folder in source, and then the source files all compile and I'm going into web root. So that's kind of the layout that we've got. And then, as I mentioned, we'll quickly run through a few of these commands of the DnaWeb. So we've just spun this up inside of the responsive folder. So we kind of spin DnaWeb up in the folder that you're working in, your template or your actual, your project folder. And then all this will happen as you're serving files. If we refresh this, well, you won't see it there, but if you edit files, you'll get kind of logs going on. You edit this file. Oh, hang on, I've got that cursor there. Let me press enter. There we go. So as you edit files, this list fills up. And then you might forget with this running, if you're running multiple ones, where you are. So you can just type the command where, and it will tell you the folder that you're currently listening in. You can also type question mark or any other keyboard command that isn't a a command and it'll list out all the commands for you and describe what they are. So the way we just created this template, if you will, is through this new template. And I'll show you what happens to do that. So if we went to the installed folder of program files, DnaWeb 1.1.6, and we have the DNA config file, you can see in here, this is the config file that happens for all DnaWebs. And we've got live data sources, and we've got 2. And this is pointing to a DNA live config file, which you can make yourself, but this is basically the one I've made, the root one, if you will. And if you look at that contents, it basically gives you information about the live source, and it then points to a zip file. That zip file, which again is all open source, you can take a look for yourself, is if we go to DnaWeb source core live data source, this is what's zipped up, and you'll have this folder. So this folder is a live data source, and then here we've got a template, and then here we've got blank, and then this blank, as you'll see, has got all those files that were just extracted into our responsive folder. So what we did when we typed into here new template and then specified a name, it was looking for, because we typed new template blank, it found in the live data source that we've already provided a template called blank, and then it basically just downloaded that zip file for us and extracted it to the folder. But the power of this is you can make these templates, you can push them online, you can host them locally. So all these templates will get increased, if you will. There'll be more added, and it'll automatically update. So you won't have to do anything. You just start up DnaWeb, and it will automatically run this live update command. And that live update command then searches the web file, see if the version's changed, and if it does, it downloads all the new stuff. So you can imagine now any kind of web template, anything you make. Let's say we make a whole website that's a really good starting point with menus and animations and everything. We can just simply zip that up, add it to our live data source, and then in any new project anywhere, you could just simply then type new template, the name of the template, and be able to, create that. So that's the point of the templates. And then we've also got variables. So these are really powerful, and these are really for, again, rapid prototyping, if you will, trying to do things fast when you're making your web. So let's give you one example. First, we can have a look at what variables are currently available. So we just type live variables. You'll see it's found a couple of fabrics, which will come into the next video. And then you've got dna.css_link and dna.html. So these are little helper variables I've added straight away. But to show you what they do, if we were just to make a new file, and let's save this in the responsive source folder HTML. We'll just make a new file to play around with. We'll just call this test.dhtml. And then here now, we could, well, we don't need to see it live there. You know what's going to happen, but we could. You can just type in here /test. And there's nothing there yet. But if we then do in this test here, if you noticed, we have this variable here called DNA_HTML. Well, the way you access a live variable is $! And then the name, which would typically be DNA.html, and then $. And now all I'm going to do here is press save, so Control S. And as I save the file, oh, there we go. I keep clicking. If you're clicking this, by the way, if you're clicking in this window and you've got a white dot, it stops the app running, so you have to press enter to keep it running. So if I undo that, and I now click save on this file, and you watch here, all I'm doing is pressing Control S, and it instantly injects the value that's inside the DNA_HTML live variable. And that live variable is simply in the sources variables, and it's just a file that you can see contains that information. And then we've got one called CSS_link, which just contains the link if you want to add a CSS file. So as you're typing away and you're doing this, and now you go, right, I need to add a CSS link. And even I forget this now. It's like, right, I want to add a CSS file. Is it link? Is it source? Is it style? You always kind of forget what the syntax are. So now instead I can just do $! Exclamation mark, CSS link, $! And save. And then it'll just inject that for us. And now we can just simply say, oh yeah, it's style.css. Now we know where it is. So kind of the point of these live variables and live templates is that as you're typing away, you can do, make any templates you like or any variables you like and have them rapidly injected just by typing, $! Exclamation mark, $! And then just, typing the name of the variable. And it'll literally get replaced live in the file as you're typing. So what we'll come on to next is responsive grids and responsive web design. And that then becomes more useful because we have these things like fabric column, fabric container grid, and the chunks of HTML that it takes a long while to write, and it's much quicker to say, we want a responsive grid in this fabric template that we'll come to. And instead of typing all of that, we can simply type this variable. So we can do $! Exclamation mark, fabric dot container grid, $! And save. And you'll see that it injects all the HTML for us. The container, the grid, the classes. It's just quicker, for chunks of data. And with it being like live, you can edit this in anything. You don't have to have it open in Visual Studio Code. You can have it open in Notepad. But the difference is, I don't believe, and I haven't checked this, I don't believe Notepad has, live updating when files edit. So that's the only, you want to at least use something that's got, live feedback. So if we open it in Notepad, it'll still work and technically change. So if we did, and you'll see it probably change in Visual Studio Code here. Let's do the CSS link one again and save. See, it's updated there, but it hasn't here, because Notepad doesn't have like a live feedback, but if you closed and reopened, it would. So when you're using this feature, you're best using something like Visual Studio Code, or Notepad++ probably has it. So whatever your flavor is, and it's just a really quick way of injecting, chunks of HTML or chunks of whatever you like at a quick command. So that's really the things that have been added to DnaWeb since the last video. Is this live server that allows this kind of, feedback of, we haven't got anything in here, have we? So if we now type in test and then save, you can see it updates. So this live server is one of the features. And then this whole live template and live variable stuff with sources, which again, if you want to make your own, all the documentation is on the website. So you simply scroll down and you'll come to live data sources, and it describes here how you use them, what you do, how you make a new template, and then making your own live data source points you to the documentation. So I did just to read that, but you don't really need to get going. So it's a fairly simple setup to get going. So we'll run through it once more. Basically quit out of this, close all of these, quit that, close that, delete the folder. And then we'd start a new project. We'd go folder, responsive. We'd type DnaWeb. That's spin up. You type new template blank, enter again, and then it creates all the files. Spin DnaWeb back up, which you won't have to in the next version because that little refresh won't be required. And then there you have now your live server running. And you just go to the response folder, open with code, and you're ready to go. You can now just go to your source files and start working away on your website and have it auto refresh for you. So that's the initial setup that you'll follow for any kind of web that we're going to be making in these videos. So next up, which I'll do next, so you won't have to wait days for the next video. We're going to start doing responsive web design. So I'm going to show you how to spin up a little website like this, which will take seconds, and then go through making the website respond. So as you drag it down to a mobile phone size, it goes to a mobile layout. As you're on a tablet, it goes to a tablet layout. The whole responsive web design. So we'll do that next. And again, thanks to the benefit of this whole setup, it'll be nice and easy to do.